Monica, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay.
I don't think we have everyone, I don't think everyone has joined as of yet.
There are two, Councilmember Steve Sanchez needs to be added.
Yeah, he keeps dropping. He's had a bad connection. He's texting me. And there's Henry. And do we have Ratty? Yes. Okay, Elaine.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes. If you don't mind assigning me as an interpreter for the Spanish language, please.
Monica, are you able to do that for him? For Alex?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And then Mayor Evans, if we could admit Jamie Asbury, she's the energy manager at IE. So I think she's on the participants list.
We asked her to promote to panelist. We have Trinidad Arredondo with the IID as well. We have asked to promote to a panelist.
Okay. All right, looks like we've got a full crew. And Monica, you're able to assist Alex on the Spanish interpretation?
Yes, I think I was asking someone to test it.
No,
She has,
actually, I do not have the function yet for interpreting. I don't see it in my computer.
okay, I'm going to have to defer to either Sabti Sanchez or Andrea Carranza. You guys are co-hosts. You have all the capabilities. I have added him. I have added Alex as an interpreter, so I'm not sure. Can you guys take a look and see why it's not?
There is another interpreter, Alex Chavez, but I myself am Alex Zeitman. I just want to verify that there's no confusion with that point. And no, I'm not assigned as of now. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll check with that. This is Abdi. I'll check with our IT, Matt, if he can assist with that.
Okay. Update, I have both Alexes added as interpreters.
So it's two Alex,
Yep.
both Alexes are the interpreters? Okay.
Can you guys see the function now?
I see interpretation on my end.
Yeah, and we tested it as well. So I just want to make sure that both interpreters can see it on their end. I have both of them added. I think we're ready to go if we can confirm that we have everyone that needs to be attending.
Any council members? I think we've got our whole crew here in La Quinta. It looks like we've got all of Indio, and I don't see
All of
anybody. All this. Okay, great. Okay, let's do this then. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Linda Evans, Mayor for the City of La Quinta, and I'd like to welcome you to the special meeting of the City Councils between the cities of La Quinta, Coachella, and Indio. And this is a virtual meeting under state order due to the governor's order in the pandemic, as well as AB 361. So we do have accessibility to the public either via written comments, via Zoom hand raising, via notations on the mobile device, and our city clerk can explain more. Monica, if you'd like to do that on how to raise hand for comments when we get to that point. Do you want to do that now, Monica?
Oh, okay. We're going to do that in just a second. I apologize.
Okay. Then without further delay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll go with roll call, please.
Councilmember Fitzpatrick,
Present.
Pena,
Present.
Raddy,
Present.
Mayor Evans.
Are we having the other clerks call their council to order?
Next,
Or
for
are we
the
noting them for the
video,
record?
Councilmember
Feel
Miller,
free.
Present.
Councilmember Ramos Amit,
I see her on there.
okay, she's present. Councilmember Holmes,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ortiz,
Present.
and Mayor Portman.
Mayor Evans, and welcome to the study session for the city of Coachella study session of the city of Coachella will not be taking any formal action. We will just be hearing information regarding the IID as well as different efforts that have been going on throughout the Coachella Valley. For the record, the attendance.
Councilmember Jacinto. Present. Councilmember Delgado. Mayor Pro Tem Gonzalez. Mayor Hernandez.
Present.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of the support entities here, our partners with IID, and thank you to the interpreters to make sure that we've got connection and communication with all of our constituents throughout our Eastern Coachella Valley. With that, if you would please rise. I believe that we had a flag there so that we can do the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll move to confirmation of agenda. Any changes by any of the city staffs?
No changes, La Quinta.
Okay. This is a study session, so as Mayor noted, Coachella, Mayor Steve Hernandez, we will not be taking action since this is to discuss electrical infrastructure needs and financing mechanisms. Let me say that study session item one more time. It's to discuss electrical infrastructure needs and financing mechanisms for the Coachella Valley cities within the Imperial Irrigation District service territory. And what we'd like to do this afternoon is do an opener for the purpose of this meeting. I'll have our city manager talk about some of the current state of electricity and supply. We'll introduce some financing mechanisms that have been discussed amongst the three city managers in the past and recently presented to the Coachella Valley Energy Commission at the last general meeting. And Monica, you have your hand
Yes,
up
we
before
can
continue.
do the instructions on how to join virtually whenever you're ready.
Go ahead and do that now, please.
Proceed. I apologize for the delay. Thank you. Whiteboard. Okay. The you can join us either via computer, iPad, or dialing via phone. Once prompted to provide public comment attendance by the presiding officer. If you're joining via phone, you can the phone number that is before you, 253-215-8782, and enter the meeting ID number. There is no ad. Please use the *9 feature to raise your hand. We are monitoring virtual attendance so that the presiding office uses the *6 feature to unmute and be able to a computer or an iPad. The raise your hand feature will be at the center lower portion of your computer, and if you're using an iPhone, the raise your hand feature is going to be under the three little dots or the ellipsis. And then
Thank you. So to continue on, I really appreciate the fact that we've got all three cities together. I don't know if we've done this in a very long time, where we've got the entire council to gather together to discuss some important issues, and that's our energy supply, reliability, capacity, and growth, not only now, future. And there are representation, and we have met for the last, since August, September of last year, and have developed three different subcommittees: the Reliability Committee, Economic Growth Committee, as well as Governance. And as we address the concerns that we've all expressed in the CVAG Energy Environmental Commission meetings when the legislation was first introduced by Assemblyman Mays for governance and representation, we quickly have learned through our education sessions and interactions with IID that while we have enjoyed low rates for some time, we look at what the long-term plan is, not only going forward now, but even beyond the compromise agreement. And we're learning a lot more about how we probably need to pull together and find some collective solutions. And I know each of us have probably some of our own direction in certain areas, and this is an opportunity for us to share some of the information that's been explored thus far. Again, no decision making or action items, but with that, I'll go ahead, and I do want to also share before I turn it over to John that LAFCO did have a special meeting today at 1 o'clock, and the sole purpose of the meeting is to hopefully try to finalize the infamous agreement with the State Water Resources Board to begin the study that was part of the bill, that while the bill for governance was vetoed, the governor did allocate $500,000 to conduct a study to help find solutions for our area for energy sources going forward. And there's been a lot of back and forth on the negotiations of that agreement, but a motion was made and unanimously passed to have the executive director execute that agreement on behalf of Riverside LAFCO. The goal is that agreement gets signed by the end of today or tomorrow by Riverside. It'll get sent then to Imperial Board of Supervisors and ultimately the State Water Resources Board for full execution. So hopefully that study will commence within the next few months, and we'll learn more, and there'll be several stakeholder meetings, which will include all of us and many others as part of that process. So with that, John, I'll turn it over to you and start with a little bit of the background and history.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Mayor, honorable mayors and council members of the three cities, members of the public. I'm here with Brian Montgomery, City of Indio, Dr. Gabriel Martin, City of Coachella. I notice we have J.B. Hamby, Vice President of the Board, Henry Martinez, the General Manager. We are in need of power infrastructure upgrades for reliability, redundancy, and economic viability. About the same times the CVEC was formed, we started having meetings between the three city managers and IID, being Henry Martinez and his staff, to discuss various projects that our developers were coming to our various cities and asking for. We've got a lot of projects on the board. La Quinta right now has 46 projects on the board, looking at a 5 to 10 year window. Monica, if you could start the slide presentation, provide a little bit of the area we are talking about.
John, just real quick, I just want to also say that we do have Supervisor V. Manuel Perez representing the unincorporated areas that have joined our call as well. So thank you very much, Manny.
Thank you, everybody.
Here is the service area that we're talking about with regards to IID's energy power distribution in the Coachella Valley. That's the area outlined in red. The city of Indio, Coachella, and La Quinta are the primary cities impacted by IID. Obviously, IID is providing both power and water to Imperial, and they also provide some power to Riverside County. This map, shows it is certainly a large areas. We have Indian Wells and a lot of the other cities, and they're on power being provided from SoCal Edison. Next slide. Monica, next slide, please.
Yeah, it's not changing for me. I apologize.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, the next slide, and this is really what we were talking about with respect to the various cities meeting with Henry Martinez and his staff on a monthly basis to discuss the power needs for our individual cities. You can see here the city of Indio, the red dots that you see are the existing substations. The large green dots are needed new substation, and the small green dots are upgrades to substations that are needed. That is what's really required to get either new development, system reliability, or redundancy into the power grid here in the city of Indio. And I've learned here recently in recent discussions as early as last week what it means with each one of these various substation, either from scratch or an upgrade. An upgrade is $11 to $12 million price tag, and that gets you 20 megawatts of power. And a new substation can be in the $23 to $28 million range. The transformers required for these substations currently, because of supply chain issues, are costing between $2 million to $3 million, 18-month lead time. And as of last week, IID started receiving some quotes from various providers that the lead time could be as much as 142 weeks. That's nearly 3 years to get the transformer required for a upgrade or for a new substation build. And when you have a small project coming into your community and they have to do an upgrade, if they're faced with a 3-year lead time just to get power, that project may go somewhere else. At any rate, next slide, please. This is the city of La Quinta. The city of La Quinta has 1 new substation required and 4 upgrades. If we do the math, that's $25 million for a new one on average, and that's 4 upgrades at $12 million apiece, roughly $73 million worth of substations that are required here in the city of La Quinta. Next slide, please. The city of, back 1 slide. City of Coachella is kind of faced with a similar situation as Indio, needing 5 new substations and 2 upgrades. That's a total of $149 million roughly. And the time frame to build and get this underway is, these are 3 years out in order to get the required parts. So at any rate, these are some of the things that we're facing. The infrastructure and what I now know about power, it's very amazing. First off, the IID staff has been extremely helpful in explaining this process, the requirements of balancing an electrical system, what it takes to build this kind of infrastructure, sharing with us, how they've looked at this, what solutions there might be out there. It's certainly a very complicated system. We're learning things about energy creep, which is basically they may look at the system a year ago and think that there's enough power in this one transformer for 5 megawatts in addition. So you could get a small development. You could put 60, 80 homes. All of a sudden with COVID, everybody stayed home. Power demands went up. People were using more energy. They were running their computers. They had their air conditioner on all day long. People are buying electric cars. All of this is adding to energy creep. So where they may have had 5 megawatts of excess power a year or 2 or 3 ago, now today they don't have that extra power. So that's it's ever changing in these areas that these substations provide power to cross city boundaries. So there is a need for all of us kind of to work together on these items because they affect all of us. So that gives you a little picture of what's out there. Now, we've been concentrating here on substations, but at the end of the day, in learning that there's roughly 540 megawatts of power demand on the books for the next 10-year build out in the Coachella Valley, that would require not only these substations, but that would require transmission line upgrades and actually additional generation. So there is a big need here for infrastructure. It seems like we're at that point in time where the low cost of power has caught up with us. We don't have the infrastructure we need, and we're really at a critical point where we need to make it happen. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Montgomery from the City of Indio to provide some ideas on what the solutions might be.
Sorry about that. Hard time unmuting. Thank you, John. You set that up very well. I think Dr. Martin as well, my other city manager colleague, for the collaborative effort that we've all been a part of in working with the excellent staff at IID. I want to commend IID and the strong personnel that they have to guide us through this process. IID's effort to create the Coachella Valley Energy Commission has really set the stage for this type of conversation. It's been instrumental in setting forth a dialogue. Directors Hanks and Hamby have been on that commission, as well as Mayor Evans has indicated, others of you that are serving to try to get us past where we are presently in addressing this very critical issue. And again, as John indicated, this is a matter of reliability, redundancy, safety, as well as economic vitality. I think it's important for all of you as policymakers to understand that this is not just for new growth. In fact, that might be just a side benefit of what's trying to be achieved in the effort to develop these substations that John went through. So just wanted to talk about this financing mechanism that has been presented to the CVEC's subcommittee, to the commission itself, as well as the IAD board, who received it well. But in essence, it's the creation of a Coachella Valley Finance Authority. Most of us as cities have separate financing authorities for different financing mechanisms. This would be one that would include anyone in the Coachella Valley within the IID service territory that would like to join. Once that authority is created, it would have some ability to issue debt. Of course, it needs revenue to do so. So as John indicated, we've been beneficiaries of very, very low rates. Depending on what your use is, somewhere on the order of 60% less rates than SCE. And so we know that if we bring in a little more revenue and we enter into a joint powers agreement, so as you see on this this flow chart, if you will, that the community would provide in our proposal a small local investment surcharge, and that payment would be on top of the current IAD rates. There could also be developer fees as they buy into these substations, these infrastructure improvements. But that resource then would be able to be leveraged to issue bonds. Those bonds, much like we do with other investments as a city, or as IID does through its revenue bond issuances, we would then issue bonds to install these very needed improvements. These bond proceeds would go to the authority. The authority would pass those proceeds back to IID, who on its own or with contractors would build the infrastructure. Who could join the finance authorities? I stated it could be any entity. The way it's been contemplated now is the three cities, but we have been in communications with the tribes, and there may be other areas, sub areas in the unincorporated county that may want to join this authority. But the idea would be that this local surcharge may be different for each city. As John showed those areas of the substations that are needed and where they currently serve and where they're needed to serve, it is different for each city. And what a local investment surcharge is palatable in each city may be different. But those important revenues would then leverage the bonds that would then turn into the infrastructure improvements that we need. Just point out some very rough numbers. I recall the city of Indio, for example, a 1% increase in the current rate structure would generate somewhere between $15 and $17 million. The infrastructure needs are significant, and we would not be able to address all of the substation needs that are needed. But for example, if the city of Indio and its role in the finance authority chose to raise rates through the surcharge 4 or 5%, it could be $80 or $90 million available for these important projects. It's important to note too that IAD has an existing program called the Customer Service Program, mostly used by developers to propose projects and to present funding mechanisms, because developers are currently required to pay the whole freight of this infrastructure. In essence, this finance authority would be a developer participating in IAD's customer service program and would follow a very similar process. So with that, I'd be available, Mayor Evans, if there's time for questions now or however you want to proceed. But that is essentially the funding mechanism that has been discussed and that we feel confident will work.
Thank you, Brian and John. I will definitely open it up for questions or comments. Let's start with the supervisor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Brian and John. Great presentation, very thorough. I was just wondering, to what degree has the county, any county staff has engaged in these discussions? I'm just wondering if you actually have a mapping of the substations that actually exist on county land, or where we would possibly need them. If there's any information you might be able to provide.
I know Henry Martinez, the general manager of IAD. I know he's been reaching out to Juan Perez, but I don't believe I have seen any maps of the unincorporated area and what's needed. But Henry, you might be the best to answer the supervisor's question.
Yes, certainly, and thank you, Supervisor Perez and mayors. Just to let you know, I did contact Juan last week. We know for a fact that the area around Thousand Palms, there's a need for a large substation up there with the Berger Foundation development that's been proposed. We've been working with them to kind of get their projects up and running as well, along with the construction of the new arena. But we know for a fact that that area needs definitely a new substation up there. We need to look a little deeper into the growth on the county side, but we can provide some more details on that, Supervisor, and work with your staff to bring more information in that area for the county.
I appreciate that, Henry. Thank you so much. And I just got a text right now from Juan Perez that he's listening in. I'm not sure if he's actually zooming in or just listening, but he's just listening in, but we'll be following up with you, Henry.
Okay, very good. No problem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mayor Hernandez?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and for all my colleagues listening in the Coachella Valley. I think, following this conversation, participating in a lot of the conversation, I think it's really important that we understand the totality of what is being asked or what is the proposal. If I'm hearing both Brian as well as our La Quinta City Manager John, there is an expectation, or there is a need for somewhere in the area of about almost $400 million of financing in order to fund substations, that assuming that every city's substation needs are met. 150 million from Coachella, 150 million somewhat Indio, and 73 million from La Quinta, if we were to build them all. And then, and John, you kind of alluded to this too, and I'm not sure if it's, you know, if you can go further into detail, but maybe Henry can help you. But in the event that we obtain 540 megawatts of new substation capacity, there would also be a need for transmission line upgrades, as well as generation upgrades. And so what is the totality of what is that ask that is being asked? And then is this financing authority is going to be asked to actually fund that? And then, you know, I've always been big about who's going to own it. It really does sound like the Coachella Valley is going to pay for it, and it should be our cities that own it. So I really want to understand the magnitude of what's being proposed, and particularly because for transparency's sake and in government sometimes to avoid, I guess, what scope creep. So what is being asked?
There's a couple things I can add to right away with. I'll address the 540 megawatt comment second, but I should address the roughly the $400 million of substation upgrades that you mentioned. The idea that we have all discussed is with every one of these substations that gets built, and for instance, we have a developer that's coming in to build 60 houses. There's a requirement to build a substation along with that 60 houses. The idea is that developer, it's hard to put the strain of a $15 million substation upgrade completely on him when all he needs is 5 megawatts of power. This is an affordable housing project that's actually within our city where this exact situation is occurring. We've got an affordable housing developer that would like to build affordable houses. In order to do that, they have to do a substation upgrade. That's a 20 megawatt upgrade. That's going to cost roughly $12 to $15 million. The idea is that this financing mechanism could build that substation or build that upgrade today. And when that developer comes in, there's a developer impact fee, and all new development would have that developer impact fee built into it, such that they pay for what they use. So their fair share is being paid for by them. That money that then is collected can be used to either accelerate the debt payment on those bonds, or it could be utilized for a fund that would potentially look at future infrastructure improvements that could be transmission line upgrades. That's kind of getting into the realm of what's that 540 megawatt need that's projected 10 years from now. Likely we won't get to that need, but when IID is doing their analysis, they're taking a look at what the future might be. And when you've got Tesla power stations and you've got the arena and you've got everybody saying, hey, I've got a viable project that's going to happen. If they start stacking up all those viable projects and what the wishes and desires of everybody are coming online, and then combining that with the power creep that we talk about, where these new energy efficient homes, all of a sudden they're not quite as energy efficient anymore. They're just not using gas, they're replacing it with electricity. So you have all of that happening, computing power, air conditioning, all this utilizing the power. So there is power creep. There is going to be needs. We're probably not going to need 540 megawatts, but I know IID is thinking about it. Along with that goes additional generation and larger transmission capacity. So that's what I can provide.
John, just to be clear though, you're saying the development community will be assessed a development impact fee for substation upgrades. But then I also heard Brian said 1%. So who's paying that? Is that the development community only, or does that go to the ratepayer that currently exists? So I'm just trying to understand that. And then if you could help me answer, and maybe that again, going back to Henry, the transmission line upgrades as well as generation. I really want to understand.
I'll go with the developer impact fee for a minute. The idea, and every city could look at how they want to charge that to their developers independently. But the idea, I think, one idea that we had talked about is every developer should pay their fair share. So if a developer comes in and they need 5 megawatts, we would expect them to pay for the cost associated with that 5 megawatts to produce it. But with the idea that it may take 3 years for that investment to be a reality, we want to get out in front of some of that. We have a particular situation, the one I was mentioning about the affordable housing developer coming in and wanting to build it. The particular substation that would need to be upgraded for that 5 megawatt is currently already impacted by power creep by the existing customer base within that area. And also when the one house gets added here or there, to the point where that existing substation is running in excess of its design capacity. So they're designed to operate at about 80% of their full capacity, and they're running closer to 100%. So the idea is if that developer comes in and pays his fair share to get the 5 megawatts, that additional that's going to be used is all going to benefit the existing customer base around that area that would benefit from that substation upgrade. And then I'll turn it over to Henry if there's anything, Henry, that you could add to that with respect to transmission.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, John. So the kind of the plan that we've been kicking around and discussing with the city managers has been one, take a look at the low-hanging fruit that we have now to be able to get some capacity added on without affecting transmission. And that basically goes back to looking at our existing substations and identifying those that require maybe a new bank that has minimal impact in regards to the actual reconfiguration or building new substations from the get-go. That gives us kind of a shorter time frame to get actual new capacity added on. And that basically will start the ball rolling. The second tier would be where we need the transmission issue, because that will require, in essence, layering a more complex planning process, but also it involves really more investment from the district to provide those upgrades required for transmission. And then the third layer is a generation where we basically would have to also accommodate bringing new generation into the Coachella Valley. And we have potentially two methods of getting more power up there. One is through upgrading the existing transmission lines to serve the Coachella Valley and tapping into potentially new geothermal generation that's being proposed down here in the valley in Imperial County to bring it out to Coachella. The second option is to basically tap into the Cal ISO system, bring that power into Mirage, and then be able to serve the north end of the valley to do so. So there are methodologies or plans, methods to basically augment the plans that the advance is being proposed up in the valley. But from my perspective, we have to really do it in stages and phases. Take the low-hanging fruit first, plan for the next tier where we actually need to build substations with the current capacity, and in parallel start planning to build the transmission lines so we need to get more power out of the system up there.
Henry, just to be clear, you would expect this financing authority to fund that, both the generation as well as the transmission upgrades?
Well, the generation would basically be a service that we basically, because it's not be fully dedicated just for the Coachella Valley. I mean, we're seeing growth out here as well, not as great as it is for the Coachella Valley, but there's some growth going on here as well. So the plan is basically for generation transmission to be part of the funding that our board will consider in meeting our balancing authority requirements. Because we can remember, as a balancing authority, we have to provide all the features and all of the aspects of reliability, voltage control, frequency control, reserves, et cetera, and that basically goes back to a total load for our system. So it's not just the Coachella Valley; it's really incorporating the needs of the Imperial County as well. So I see kind of the transmission generation aspect correlated, but not necessarily directly funded by the Coachella Valley, because that's part of the greater. If you think about it, it's like a freeway investment to move that energy into the Coachella Valley. The distribution system itself is more of a local street system to be able to get that power distributed to the cities and the county. So that's where you're going to see the differences between the two. There'll be some impacts at the seams for increases in transmission, but is not fully borne by I would say the Coachella Valley entirely. And, in fact, the mayor, back to the issue of ownership, I think this is something that has been discussed. You and I have had one discussion on this matter. And I think it's something we got to keep in mind, but ultimately that issue is going to be resolved at some point here shortly, because we don't have, the agreement with the Coachella Valley Water District expires in 2033. So that's in play, but I think at this point, looking at the short-term requirements that are brewing up in the Coachella Valley, we have to really kind of think about it from an investment perspective of the Coachella Valley to meet their needs. Otherwise, the economy is going to suffer, or potential opportunities for the Coachella Valley will be non-existent up there. And then the last thing I also want to just reiterate, and John made the point here, the supply chain issue is really putting to some extent some pressure on how quickly we can move. We've had discussions here with the city managers about maybe even pre-funding or ordering equipment, knowing that the lead time now is just going into 2 or 3 years, as John indicated. That there has to be this almost like a no-fault decision from the perspective of pre-ordering some of the larger equipment that we know that this is going to take some time, and at least get that ball rolling going forward. So let me stop there, see if there's any questions. I see Brian has got his hand raised.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I'll just jump in, but Henry answered most of what I was going to say. But one unique aspect and a benefit of this proposal is that it is area specific. So each city could determine, or unincorporated area, how much infrastructure they wanted to install, and the substations are localized, whereas transmission, to your question, Mayor Hernandez, is much more global, and Henry explained that. We would expect all of the ratepayers to address transmission and generation, whereas these substations are more localized. So that might explain some of that difference. With regard to ownership, the city managers have discussed and believe it's important for IAD to own the infrastructure. All of the infrastructure that IAD owns has been paid for by all of us, by all of the ratepayers, and that would continue to be the case. But it would be maintained by IAD, and that's a cost and an effort that the cities, I don't believe, would want to be a part of moving forward. So again, just trying to clarify that each city could determine how much of that 400 million it needed to address, and it would be specific and localized to the substations, not beyond that effort.
Councilmember Pena. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of questions. One, has there been any discussion about mini grids? Providing their own mini grids, developers providing their own. Obviously, if you're making an investment of $25 million into a substation, you're turning that over to IID. Whereas if a developer or a city would make that same investment in a mini grid, they would own the asset.
Yes, and the answer to your question, Councilmember, is yes. As a matter of fact, let me ask Jamie to maybe chime in a little bit, because we've been exploring this area, and we do have mandates to consider rates for microgrids. So Jamie, can you maybe elaborate on that, please?
Sure. So SB 1339, which was codified in 2019, required publicly owned utilities to, within 180 days of receiving its first application for a microgrid, to develop the interconnection process and the tariff schedules that would drive how we handle that in terms of what it consumed from the system and what it offsets on the system. So that's in process, but those microgrids that we've received to date have been smaller in scale. When you start getting larger microgrids, those are network loads, and then they present a balancing authority area charge, and then they get covered under our tariff, which makes it that much more complicated. I think one of the things, and I think we think that microgrids have a place locationally, they can take strain off the system. They can, there are a lot of interesting dynamics currently in how they're being developed, and that some of them can be daisy chained together, provided that the developer is the same in all of them. But those things provide a level of complexity that have to be worked through. One of the things that Henry touched on and Mayor Hernandez has asked about is energy supply. So what makes this even more complicated is that the renewable portfolio standard requirements say to IAD, as a publicly owned utility, or in fact any load serving entity in California, 65% of your 100% has to be from a contract of a duration of 10 years or more. So that starts getting us into sort of that balancing act that's a little bit difficult. So we're looking at microgrids. We are in the process of developing the interconnection process, Mr. Pena, and the tariff that it'll be addressed by. It's very similar to how solar is interconnected, but it's a load and a resource at the same time on a larger scale. So we're working on that, but we're also trying to minimize long-term impacts by looking at resources that we can get into the system as quickly as possible or online as quickly as possible, and still sort of managing that 10-year horizon, given all the things that are upcoming. I'm happy to answer additional questions, and I hope that was responsive.
Thank you, Jamie. Other questions, comments? Do we have any requests to speak from our attendees?
No request to speak at this time.
I have another question, and I have a lot of questions sometimes. And obviously right now we're looking at a publicly financed solution to meeting our needs here in the Coachella Valley. This is really a public solution. But has this committee, 3 city managers with Henry, looked at a private public solution? In other words, gauging the interests of the private sector that perhaps they may want to finance and take the risk, as opposed to bearing or putting basically the ratepayer, our constituents, on the hook for what would be a 1% surcharge on their energy bill.
I might jump in, Mayor. Just back to the 1%, when I indicated 1% would generate so much revenue, it would need to be larger than 1% to achieve anything significant. So that's something for each city to evaluate. But no, nothing is free. So whether the existing program that IAD has, where the developer pays the full freight, puts the developer in the position that John described, and we've got a similar one in Indio, where a development needs approximately 5 megawatts, but that is not available to them. So they're being asked to build 20 or 25 megawatts. And currently there's no reimbursement to the developer. So there's no incentive for the developer to upfront that kind of money, particularly with no hope of reimbursement. But even if there were reimbursement, I doubt most developers would step forward. If we're in a competitive environment for jobs and the type of economic growth that we all seek, we will just not be competitive. They will go elsewhere. So we need to be ahead. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we were in a position right now where there was capacity in these substations and someone knocks on the door in La Quinta or Coachella or Indio and says, I'm looking to build this development. It's going to be 500 jobs for the valley. And we could tell them, wouldn't it be wonderful to say, we have power capacity for you? Right now, we have to say we do not. So we must leverage a broader income base, all of our ratepayers, to be able to leverage these bonds and to secure that debt, to be able to install that infrastructure ahead of the development. But please recognize that redundancy is critical for all of us, not just that new development. So I think as we discuss this with our residents, they need to understand this is for them as well as what might come in the future.
No, I think we can all agree that if we were in a better position where we had capacity on our substations to handle the flow or the new economic development that's happening, we would all be better off. And I think that's the one thing we all agree with. I'm just simply asking is, have we explored all models? Right now, what's being presented is a public model. It's the JPA being formed, a model in which we assess ourselves 1% or whatever that number is, and then we pre-build, and then ultimately I would imagine that the JPA would have the fiduciary responsibility to pay that note, and so we would be on the hook as a public entity. I'm just asking, have we explored a model where we go out to the public sector that's not a developer, but a public entity or a private entity, I should say, that would be willing to explore this type of investment?
Yeah, I should have answered that more specifically. Well, other than the existing program for development, no, we have not. But we don't believe the private sector would find any better financing than we could achieve through a tax-exempt bond issuance. So while we could explore that, I'm not confident that the viability would be there. But the other, just back to this need to order this equipment immediately, we've encouraged IAD to start placing the orders now, even if we need to help put down some of the deposit. I'm not sure how much more analysis we want to make before we start taking action to address a problem that once we start could still be 2 or 3 years away to resolution. So sooner the better. We may be able to modify things over time and look at other alternatives, but we need to get something done soon.
Mayor Pro Tem Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, I'm listening with interest, and I watched your last executive meeting over the weekend, and I'm just so happy that we're finally at a point where we're doing something. I know we in La Quinta have been talking about our developmental power needs for the last 5 years that I've been on council. So I'm glad that we are finally developing a good relationship with IID and trying to move forward. And I think we have two separate issues, obviously, the near term and the long term. And I think we need to very carefully separate those and work on the near term very quickly. And part of that is getting the word out to our constituents and IID's ratepayers that we've enjoyed a long period of time where we've paid very little for power relative to anybody else. And because of that, we have very serious infrastructure needs now. And in order for us to be able to go forward responsibly as representatives of our residents, we need to be talking about how we raise the funds to help secure a position with IID that I think is building some trust and building a real working relationship so that we can move forward. So I wholehearther support this effort. I think that we should be next steps, spending more time in front of our own residents with another study session so that people begin to really understand how critical this problem is. And then move forward on a separate path, looking at some of the other issues that Mayor Hernandez brings up, which are the long-term issues, how we solve for 2033. But at this point in time, we have to solve for 2025. And the only way to do that is to get started right now. So thank you, IID, for coming to the table, sitting down and talking to us. Thank you to our hardworking city managers who are helping direct this process. And I'm here to support you. Thank you.
Kathleen. Elaine, Councilmember Holmes.
Thank you, Councilmember Fitzpatrick. Thank you for your words. I echo them. This is something that we have been considering and looking at and evaluating for quite a while, for several months. And the relationship we have with IID is now a solid one. Time is of the essence. This valley, it's not just Indio or just Coachella or just La Quinta. This valley suffers if we don't wrap our arms around this, take a first step, and maybe even a second step to move forward. There's not always economic prosperity comes in batches and timeframes. It does not exist on a timeline that goes on forever. I think we have done a lot of research. It's something I support. We've done a lot of research, and I think we have the tools and the knowledge. We've done a significant amount of evaluation to take that next step to move this forward, so that we can always, or all of us can really reap the benefits of being able to bring in, whether it's industry or housing or larger retail centers. So this is also something I support very strongly.
Thank you, Elaine. Councilmember Sanchez, and then Councilmember Reddy.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a quick question for our city manager, John. Did you say it was about $75 million? Is that what we need for our city, approximately?
It was roughly 75 million. Let me see what I got 73 million to be exact. What I
73 million. Okay. And then with the developer impact fees, it can pay down either pay down the debt, or so we can use it for other growth, correct? Is that what we said?
The idea would be to accelerate the payoff of the debt on those bonds, or to be utilized for other infrastructure upgrades in the future.
Okay. And then given the size of our city and land available and developments that are in the pipeline or can be in the pipeline, if we were fully built out, all the developers came in, all right, let's do this. How much of that 73 million would be potentially paid off from future development in our city? Do we have something like that calculated?
We don't have an exact number on that, but if I were to take a guess at it, it would be somewhere between 65% and 80% would get paid back.
Oh, okay. And then the rest would be via the electric rate surcharge.
And like you were kind of indicating there, that would be like at build out. And the idea is that current ratepayers are benefiting from this.
Sure.
I mean, when a substation is running at 100% capacity, when it's designed to run at 80% capacity, if every one of these substation improvement gets made and new substations are built, they're going to then be running at their design capacity.
Right. So it'll ease the load on the rest of the greater La Quinta, let's just say, right? Yeah. With the hopes that it prevents blackouts or anything like that. So it does. Yes. Thank you, City Manager. I agree with my fellow colleagues that have spoken already. I'm in full support. I'm grateful that all the cities have gotten together, along with the supervisor's office, and I'm looking forward to the tribe's input also. The growth in Coachella and Indio and unincorporated county, it's not just vital for their respective cities. It's important for my city also. When Indio grows and expands and does well, La Quinta does well, right? Because all of that bleeds over into my city. The same thing with unincorporated county. If the county can grow and expand out of the East Valley, jobs, quality of life, that bleeds over into our city as well with quality of life, because that's tourism, that's commerce that comes into our city. So selfishly, I want our city to grow properly, but I also want the other cities in the area in the East Valley to be successful and grow as well, because we're in this as a team. We're individual cities, but regionally, we're just one big city if you look at it from a map. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One aspect I would like to point out, first and foremost, I would like to echo the thanks to the city managers as well as IID for coming together and getting this moving. We have momentum right now, and analysis paralysis is not the option. One aspect to point out is the only free cheese is in the mousetrap. And by waiting, we are just building a bigger mousetrap that will get us all. None of us is an island unto itself. No city in the valley is an island unto itself. We are codependent and our destinies are connected. And I echo the sentiment of Councilmember Sanchez that the rising tide rises all the boats. And so that's where the perspective we have to take. This is already a private-public partnership. We are asking the developers to participate in this. And we are asking the ratepayers to participate in this. And that's important that we understand that this the electricity power is a public utility. It's not something that we have to put on the shoulder of the private sector and expect they're gonna take care of it somehow, somewhere. It is really up to us to take what we have right now, which is momentum forward, and run with it. I'm in full support to look and execute something that makes sense for all stakeholders. And the only way forward is what has been presented here so eloquently by Mr. Montgomery and Mr. McMillan and others that spoke here today from a competency point of view. I have no competency in how to generate power, transmit power, or anything like that. That's not what I do on a daily basis. But I do understand when I'm offered a solution that has legs, that it makes sense financially, economically, and it will sustain us for the foreseeable future. So, Madam Mayor, in full support of what has been presented today. I have a question. These bonds, are we talking about 30 years bonds? What are we talking about in length of debt? In servicing the debt for how long? Is it going to be revolving? Is it going to be, we're going to keep issuing bonds? How is it really working? Is that something we'll have to find out at a later time? And are these tax-exempt bonds as well?
Brian or Henry?
Yes, the term that we've used similar to other municipal bonds is 30 years.
30 years, yeah.
But there would be the option, as John indicated, that as revenues come in, we would make sure that there be no premium paid for an early payoff of those bonds, because developer revenues would come in a way that might eventually pay for, say, 70% of the overall cost. Now, should the Finance Authority believe that some other improvements are then needed, say 12, 13, 15 years from now, then they could issue debt again or refinance, much like we all do. While rates are creeping up, and we all know that, historically, these borrowing rates are very, very low and much lower than the cost of inflation. So we're also beating inflation by trying to move forward as fast as possible so that the cost of these improvements doesn't continue to eat us alive as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. And that's why I asked the question, because taxes and bonds bring their own reality to the table, and pay them off early is often not an option, and that really provides restrictions. So thank you for the answer. Thank you for all the good work that's been going into this. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Furman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First off, I want to thank the city managers for all the hard work that went on behind this, and thank all the committees, and thank IID for working with us and collaborating with us on these endeavors. I just want to add that there was discussion, and the LAFCO study is also looking into other means of working this out. However, we felt that this was probably the most realistic and viable, and for our communities here in the Coachella Valley. So we wanted to bring this to our other councils for discussion. So also thank the other cities for working with us and collaborating with us on this. And it was touched on earlier, and I think it's very important that we stress the fact that due to lack of, due to the very extremely low rates of our ratepayers in our valley, there was no investment in the infrastructure, and we're playing catch up. However, we're playing catch up at a very crucial time when rates and inflation fees are going up. So I think it's important that we start to take next steps and start to work on the nuts and bolts of this. Anytime you talk about a surcharge or a rate increasement, that's a dollar amount out of our constituents' pocket, and we're very cognizant of that. And it was thought of very thoroughly, especially in some of our communities that are burdened by utilities and are on fixed incomes. And the city of Indio has a very large, senior population as well. So those things are taken into consideration. However, I think we're in a very crucial moment to where we have to start taking that steps and figuring out solutions of invested in our infrastructure and our power here in the Coachella Valley, not now and in the future. And I also want to, bring up the fact that, and someone from IID correct me, IID is a water company that happens to have power, and they supply us. So I don't think IID also looked at this down the road. And so now IID is making prudent steps to plan for the future as well as it pertains to power in Imperial and Coachella Valley. My only question would be now, what would be the next steps as far as how can we move, take a next step to start ordering or investing in those transmission infrastructure now because of the increase in rates. I think that's the direction we need to start moving in and talking about. So and also as far as transmission lines, how would that work, as far as paying for transmission lines as well? So thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Before we answer some of those and very good points, I see a raised hand from Councilmember Miller. Glenn?
Yeah, just quickly, I concur with everyone that we need to do something. We've waited way too long. But my concerns are, on the bonds, is this going to be a one-time deal at the start? Is each city responsible for their amount for each of their transformers? Because each have different needs. How do we divide that up in the JPA and pay things off? Does each individual city decide then that we're going to pay ours off or the money, or then all of a sudden we have other issues that might come in that maybe affect Coachella or La Quinta or Indio differently, or even the county? How do we concur with those as we start to grow, or do they separate from the JPA and start to buy their own infrastructure, or does IID do it? And then the last thing is, how do we go forward with this when we have the county also, which is a major component of these areas, if they're not on board? Because what's the realistic time frame of getting this JPA up and ordered? Or is IID going to do us a solid and allow us to have them order the equipment well in advance, hoping that we work out a deal later? Because starting a JPA, putting money aside, getting the bonds, we're not talking days, we're talking a year at least, if not more. And now 2 years more adding equipment. We're pushing ourselves out quite a bit. So just a couple of questions that can be answered now or later. But the financial part of it's great to be able to look at it, but what's realistic too? Thank you. And thanks for all the hard work, everyone.
Yeah, I'd like to have Henry address those. I would like to add, when you look at the rates that we've enjoyed and you look at inevitably that potentially changing, I would much rather have a situation and a structure whereby the residents of each city that are contributing, that money is being spent within that city for the needs they have, versus how 60% of the revenue that's being provided to IID is coming from the Coachella Valley, but we're still faced with upgrade, transmission, and growth challenges and reliability challenges. So at least it's managing our own budget, so to speak. But Henry, if you can elaborate on ordering and timing and prioritization and such.
Yes, well, certainly, like I mentioned before, speaking with the city managers, there's a list of, they give us a list of priorities, and it's quite large to begin with. But as I mentioned before, the strategy that we're thinking about following is to basically look at those substations where we need minimal investment and get those transformers ordered early enough before the funding per se begins. Because as Mr. Miller indicated, this financial and legal structure, will take time to get it not only formulated, but also vetted through your councils as well. And also if the county participates through their process. So the idea, and again, would be for IED to basically use a no regrets decision, which is basically pre-ordering transformers sufficiently enough now that if for whatever reason the financing model did not go through, we're not going to be basically saying, well, we invested in something we're not going to use, because we'll be needing those transformers at some point in our system. And that's the risk that we'll be discussing with the board to take that approach. And while this whole discussion goes in formulating the financing authority itself, then we can get more aggressive on building or at least planning for more infrastructure to be built. In regards to the transmission, we already know to some extent where the impacts will be on the transmission, but also to let you know that we've also been looking independent of this discussion with the financing authority to determine how do we get more more energy sources to the valley up there, and in a timely basis be able to couple not only the expansion of substations but also the transmission capacity that we need and the generation up there. So those are plans already underway, and those will be again discussed with the board in regards to those investments and contracts that would be required to be authorized for that to be added on to the expenditures. And those, by the way, will be base loaded expenses in essence. So it will be a base charge for energy. And even though we don't necessarily identify the cost of transmission independently, it's rolled into the base rates that will be contemplating that the board will also have to consider. So, but I think going back to Mr. Miller's point is that with all the moving parts right now, I think the issue would be to start ordering transformers, get those long lean items in the way, starting to get the rollout of new investments to have more capacity. And then, frankly, working with, at some point with the authority, the financing authority, to determine where do we put the money. Because keep in mind that these substations may be located in one city, but it will have also implications of distribution to other cities adjacent to the area. So that's where I think the issue of prioritization, cost responsibility, cost allocations, et cetera, that will be discussed within the review of the balancing of the financial authority, whoever may sit on that board. Because the energy itself will follow and will go in the directions of the substation distribution-wise, wherever the load is going to be showing up. So those are more kind of what I would say more second, third level discussions that have to be addressed, but that would be forthcoming once the structure and the financial authority is formulated.
Thank you, Henry. If we can talk through the current program that IID has now and that process, Henry, if an entity approaches IID and says they want to do this concept similar to what we've been discussing today.
Yeah, certainly. Let me have Jamie kind of get you walk through the details here. So there's no more detail first in this whole process. So, Jamie?
So I'm assuming you're talking about the customer service proposal process.
Yes.
You would come in and submit an application that would require pretty significant technical information about what load you require. They will do an assessment of your project layered on the projects that are in line before it to the extent possible. A cost estimate will be prepared. They usually meet and dialogue pretty significantly with developers, and then a plan of services developed and a will serve letter is predicated based on conditions that are identified in your study process. And it contains like a good faith, high level cost estimate because we have no ability to, as we've seen in the last couple of years, we have no impact on or no ability to influence the supply chain timing, and we also have no ability to address the cost of raw materials that we're also seeing a shortage of that go into the component parts. Happy to discuss any part of that. It seems like you can say it very quickly. It takes a little bit longer than that to go through.
And ultimately requires IID board approval, correct?
Well, when you get to the point, Mayor Evans, where we've got a project and it's ready to go forward, the district has policies and staff has to live within them, and anything over $200,000, even though it's customer funded, and because the board has that fiduciary responsibility and being a good steward of those dollars, we take forward what's called a major work authorization. Many of the people, or I see some of the people on this call today, are members of the Energy Consumer Advisory Committee. So we take it as an informational item to the ECAC. We want to make sure that as community representatives, they understand what's going on. That major work authorization shows the environmental component, what we've looked at alternatives. This is the least cost best fit. If there are other alternatives, these are our least regrets. Where the funding is coming from, what line in the capital budget it's coming from, so there's complete transparency in those projects. And once the board approves that major work authorization, or MWA, then we are authorized, staff is authorized to commence engineering, procurement, and construction required to move the project forward.
Okay. So a question for my city manager, John McMillan. We look at La Quinta's immediate need. I know we always talk about substations, but then we learn that it's actually about transformers. What is our immediate need? Not necessarily, or is it a combination immediate need for growth as well as just capacity? Because there's areas we have zero capacity, and the cost associated with that.
It's an immediate need for both, and through that process, reviewed kind of our 46 projects that are listed that we're sharing right now with IID. They came in with their 5-year list of projected projects. We told them which projects they could scratch and which projects they hadn't identified yet. After reviewing that list, and talking to their engineers, we identified 3 key substation upgrades. And some of them were, designed to support what mostly would be a new project, whereas other ones, which was the Marshall one, which was the Marshall substation, which I was talking about a lot, because that's the one where there are a project proposed for 64 affordable units. And of that, that transformer is at really that substation is producing way more than it can really handle at this point. So the benefits are for both for new and for future. But those transformers, really the dollar amount of all of that investment at this point is only $2.3 million per transformer, that long lead item. So as in any construction project, get ahead on your long lead items. And, so you're looking at maybe a $7 million investment today. But 18 months from now, we may be ordering switchgear and other items that might go into that project as well.
Thank you.
Mayor, I might just add, we have learned that there is a significant rate stabilization fund that IAD has, and it may be available, as we kindly and respectfully urge them to consider, the board to consider whatever share of that is from the Coachella Valley. Perhaps that could assist with the early ordering of these transformers. And that's something that we'll continue to discuss with the IAD team.
Very good. All right, let's see. The hand is up from Councilmember Pena. Go ahead, John.
And Madam Mayor, in moving forward too, I wonder if it might not be a good idea to establish an ad hoc committee from all 3 cities so we don't lose momentum. This is a great beginning, but I think that this is going to have to increase, and maybe that's something that we ought to look forward to in the future and keep this dialogue moving quickly.
Well, I guess for the ease of multiple meetings, I don't know if perhaps we utilize the assigned individuals that are on the CVEC now, which is representation of each of the mayors, and the city managers have been engaged in those as well as obviously IID and staff. And welcome any other individual who has a burning desire to be so enlightened by the opportunities and challenges of our electrical program that we have in our area. It has been quite the learning experience the last several months, for sure. But when we do look about next steps and we look about how we continue to talk amongst ourselves with IID, as Mayor Pro Tem Fitzpatrick had indicated, it's a matter of needing to share this with our constituents as well, and starting those discussions and knowing that those aren't easy discussions to have, and recognizing to try to get them perhaps ramped up to what we've gathered over the months and what the future might look like. From, just in the last week, we went on an energy tour a week ago Thursday, looked at all of the systems and IID. By Sunday, we had 2 power outages in the city of La Quinta. One was Mylar balloons, another was a fuse. Just, random things that will continue to happen. Unfortunately, it wasn't windstorms, it wasn't down power poles, but you then consider how frequent does this happen? What can we have as a backup? How do we ensure that we've got other things in place to minimize those on a go-forward basis? Not even considering the growth piece. It's more about maintenance. We passed something in La Quinta that new build requires underground utilities. Well, we've quickly learned that that's not necessarily affordable for many developers. And when you look at taking a section and doing an underground piece, there are some nuances that affect that entire area. So when we see how one small fraction of potential contribution by all of the residents actually benefits the city in its entirety, because we are seeing that a development that comes in and undergrounds actually does provide value to the surrounding areas if it can get executed. So, as Brian said, it's how do we take the short-term approach now and start working towards that? And as other solutions might come forward through the LAFCO study or through other means, and continue to have this discussion, perhaps look at a timing piece, as Councilmember Miller indicated. What does that timing look like to develop a JPA financing authority? What does the timing look like on our immediate needs in each of our cities from an ordering of equipment standpoint and those costs, those potential projects? And do we look at tackling them on a small scale first? Do we begin, drafting documentation as we're informing residents of a potential concept with this surcharge? And what kind of time frame do we collectively think we would want to come back and continue this discussion and conversation as we learn more?
Madam Mayor, if I could just mention here that you don't need all the cities to come forward and together. What I understand from this JPA, it's going to be available for those cities that want to participate. So I think cities that want to participate know what they're going to do. They can come forward. I think at least for me, I'm going to recommend that City of Coachella continue. And other council members are here. I think this is such a huge issue and one with a lot of substance that we continue to have study sessions, Dr. Martin, as a community and as a city to fully vet this out, as well as inform our constituents, because there's a lot of money on the line. And I'll just add something here. In 2004, the city of Coachella, we have our own water and sewer, issued $35 million in bonds because the assumption was that development was going to come and that we were going to see it. And it never came, and our taxpayers ultimately got hit with a significant amount of water and sewer rate increases and left holding the bill. So we're really talking about, the public, trough and public responsibility and really being responsible with our ratepayers' money. So I'm going to just recommend to our council that we continue to study.
Is that like a once bitten, twice shy approach? I mean, that's real. Other comments?
I just want to maybe add, Madam Mayor, once again, I appreciate the conversation that I heard from different folks about Coachella Valley wide. This is a region as a whole, and it includes the unincorporated areas. You heard about Thousand Palms earlier. You've heard about what's happened in North Shore area and the concerns that we have there. Developers are coming my way on a daily basis, whether they want to develop in Thousand Palms or around the airport, for example. There's a lot of stuff happening. And the growth is not going to stop.
No.
People are not going to stop coming this way. They're not just for the festivals. People are moving in ongoingly. And so just want to ask that, county staff engage and be part of whatever the group decides, because I also have to consider, I'd like for all of us to consider the folks that are living in unincorporated areas as well. So I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Amit, I saw your hand up, and then we'll go back to Mayor Furman.
Thank you. I just wanted to interject a little bit because I've been here a little bit longer than most. And I mentioned to Supervisor Perez a couple nights ago that he's 20 years in the past. And I think tonight we are kind of thinking only in the present and the past, and we need to think into the future. We're not talking about the impacts that are going to have on our communities today. We're talking about the long-term, long-range planning. And I say that, and this is a story that some of you may be sick of, but when I was a little girl growing up in Indio, there was only Indio and Palm Springs. And I would walk to school downtown Indio, and I would see the population sign, and it would say 6,742. And I would ask my mother every day, when is that population sign going to change? Now remember, the only cities were Indio and Palm Springs. Everything in between was Dune Palms and unincorporated areas. But had not our forefathers made the decisions they made 60 years ago to invest in our future, growth would not have happened. So I'm asking everyone tonight at this meeting, don't be short-sighted. Think about the future of the Coachella Valley. If we are to grow beyond the 350,000 that we are today, which our residents demand because they demand the services and the products that they currently have to drive outside of our Coachella Valley to receive or to order online. We as policymakers need to make those decisions today to make investments in the infrastructure that will support the needs of our residents. And if the residents of today have to pay for that, then I think they are willing to do that because the residents of tomorrow will continue to pay for it. So I want you to give you a little perspective over my 60-year lifetime, what has happened in the Coachella Valley and what can happen over your lifetime in 60 years, because I'm not going to be here in 60 years, but you will be. And the future will be in the decisions that you make.
Thank you, Lupe. Mayor Furman, it's kind of like the 100-year water compromise agreement, and build it and they will come.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Amit. You took the wind out of my sail on that one. But I wanted to just expand on that. I think this is a time where we have to make some bold decisions and leave this in better shape than when we picked it up. So I'm hoping my city could continue discussions with our community and really educating our community on what we're talking about here. This was a quick meeting. However, this is a very crucial time in our world, so I hope that the city of Indio could continue to have these conversations with our community. And I know we're waiting for the LAFCO study. However, I think this is probably the most realistic direction that we could go. And I think that's going to benefit us for the future. So I'm in support of going in this direction if we could make that happen.
Great, thank you. Well, I appreciate all of the input and feedback, and again, as others have echoed, the amount of work from our city managers and IID and the staff to get us to this point. And while there's been some of the council members or mayors that have been informed about this as it gets delivered and or through the Energy Commission. I think it was important for all of the council members to come together to hear this collectively and share questions and thoughts, because that's how we answer more questions, is by the information that's shared. So it sounds like the go forward plan is more discussion, taking this back to our respective cities, looking at perhaps outlining those immediate demands, project needs, costs with the IID staff. So we have really that solid basis to share and show examples of 0.1% of a bill and what that might yield collectively as a city. And it is true, it's based on who or what entity wants to participate and when. Think there's just collectively, it's, if you have a good idea or if you have potential solutions, to be able to share those with all of our region. We have been successful with regional projects in the past, and that's why it's important to make sure that there's inclusion from all those parties as well. And I appreciate the discussion. I see a hand up by Mayor Pro Tem Fitzpatrick.
I would just like to suggest that since we've all talked about going back and having study sessions with our council and to allow our residents to come in, that perhaps we have a report back date certain in 60 days or something, so that we all get together again and bring some of the feelings that and questions that we've heard from our residents back, so that we can continue to work on this as from a ground level up. I mean, because this is going to be a ground level up kind of situation where we end up with solutions.
I'm comfortable with that. I'll defer to city managers on timing, and Henry, if we could get some deliverables on more information or concrete prioritization and costs and needs by jurisdiction.
Yeah, so maybe I can make a couple of comments. We've been meeting on a monthly basis with the city managers and discussing kind of a global perspective, not only the infrastructure needs, but also prioritizing the substations, and to some extent the finance authority that's been proposed. I think we can get to a more deliverable short-term plan here in the next, well, when's the next meeting, Brian? I think 3 weeks?
In a few weeks.
Yeah, probably after the Memorial Day weekend, we'll probably come back and at least propose a short-term plan going forward. And Brian, I think you have your consultants still working on this more detailed plan, so maybe you can turn them on. You got to get more granular as to what is their timetable to develop this model, in essence, and more granularity, more information basically is going to be required. So I think we can provide, maybe in a month's time, some first 2 or 3 steps that we need to take, and I definitely discuss this with the board in the next couple of board meetings. Going to get this concept also more, at least communicated and discussed with my board, so that we align all the pieces here going forward. Hamby, any comments from you?
No, I think that's a good going forward plan, and I'm very appreciative to all of the cities and all the councils for putting together this really excellent joint meeting. I've never seen anything quite like this, and I think it's really heartening to see what has been accomplished in a very short span of time. And I think the city managers did a really outstanding job in taking a crack at, I think, what has been a problem that we've all tried to encounter in different ways for several decades, but they managed to come up with a very elegant solution in a very short period of time. And so I think that's a real testament to where we're going, and look forward to the continuing work with everybody.
Let me also add that I've asked Juan to stay involved with us, so we'll send you the invitation, Juan, for the next meeting, so you can participate and get up to speed.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate that, and thank you for all our county staff. Much appreciated.
Oh.
And perhaps we can get the maps that Supervisor Perez had inquired about for those unincorporated areas, given the extensive amount of projects in those unincorporated areas, and obviously the need for power as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Madam Mayor.
Okay, well, I know many of us will be heading over to Indian Wells for the Cal Cities Vision meeting for the league, and I appreciate the investment of time as well as the information presented. And for those approximately 27 attendees beyond this group of 34 panelists that are engaged in learning more and obviously have a vested interest, as Councilmember Amit had indicated, not only for now, but for the future. There's been lots of decisions that many people in these squares have made over their term as elected officials that have benefited what we're enjoying in our little paradise at Coachella Valley. So I'd like to keep that thought in mind and continue that momentum.
I have one more, just real quick before we end. Prior to joining the city council, I was on the school board, and I represented part of the West Shores area in Imperial County, and realized that there's nobody here. I know we're in Coachella Valley, but the West Shores community, Desert Shore, Salton Beach, Salton City, they're also not part of the IED voting territory, and they're not part of the Coachella Valley. So I just wanted to point it out to Director Hamby, to reach out to the supervisor for that region, as well as folks that represent those communities, just because they're not part of the Coachella Valley, so they're not included in this space, but they're also not part of your IID voting territory. So I just wanted to highlight that they're not my constituents anymore, but I know those families pretty well, and as I used to represent them. So I wanted to just mention that before we end.
And that's a very good point. We do have one woman on our Coachella Valley Energy Commission. She represents that area. It's kind of a unique area, as she's expressed in the past. It's kind of neither really Coachella and neither really Imperial, but as you mentioned, the Desert Shores communities, Salton City, even on the other side in Bombay Beach. It's a unique situation that we want to make sure that those voices are lifted up and we're taking care of everyone here.
Thank you. Thank you, Naftali. Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Adjournment.
Second, India.
All right, everybody can wave collectively on all three cities if you would like.
Recording
right.
stopped.
I just want to say thank you again and appreciate your time and look forward to us reconvening for additional discussion information. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you.